What would happen if every human being on Earth disappeared? This isn't the story of how we might vanish. It is the story of what happens to the world we leave behind. In this episode of Life After People, water gave life to mankind, but it can also destroy. Which mighty towers are most vulnerable to destruction by water? What strange aquarium dweller can survive a whole year without people? And what flooded city gives its former residents the best chance of being preserved as fossils far into the future? This is just part of a journey that will take us to the future of once crowded cities, as well as haunting sites already devoid of man. Welcome to Earth, population 0. 80% of Earth is covered by water. And man built his civilization on the remaining 20% by using water's power. Lakes and oceans were harvested for food. Rivers were harnessed for irrigation and electricity. But in a life after people, the power of water will flow unchecked and tear down the civilization it helped create. One day after people, at a height of 510 miles, weather satellites soar over the North and South poles, orbiting the Earth 14 times a day. Once, 6 billion people depended on the data they provided on sea level, rainfall, and humidity, how water affects the world. Now, although their solar panels will power them for decades, the satellites send their data to ground stations that are empty. There is no one in Moscow to be warned of a sudden cold front. No one to be told if this is one of the 25 days a year when rain will fall in Dubai. And no one will be warned if another hurricane threatens the levees of New Orleans. The city's French Quarter dates back to 1718, when the government of Louis XV built a trade and military outpost along the Mississippi River. Under the American flag, the quarter became famous for its music, revelry, and Mardi Gras celebrations. Now, the party's over, forever. And not just for humans. Many animals left behind will not last long. The death count begins at the Audubon Aquarium of the Americas, just a stone's throw from the Mississippi River. The aquarium can support over 12,000 marine animals in 1 million gallons of fresh and salt water. In the first few days after people, some fish will starve. But the real problem is the sudden lack of electricity to the aquarium pumps. In the time of humans, 50 pumps kept the fish healthy by adding oxygen to the water and removing waste, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
After humans disappeared from our aquarium, the emergency generator would run for about a week, and after that, run out of fuel, and there would be no one here to fix it.
While aquarium fish in New Orleans have a few days left to live, fish in another coastal city are already rotting. Two days after people, and 2,000 miles away, Seattle, Washington, built along the saltwater Puget Sound, is filling with scavengers. The Pike Place Fish Market, first opened in 1907, was where fishmongers sold their catches from the waters of the world. But unless it's frozen, fish will not stay fresh for more than 48 hours. As they decompose, fish release an organic compound called trimethylamine. The stench tells hungry creatures to come running.
Without the fishmongers there, keeping their product refrigerated and so forth, you're gonna have rapid decomposition. Things are gonna rot. You'd have coyotes, raccoons, and things coming in because they do come to the outskirts of the downtown, and it wouldn't take them long to find Pike Place Market.
Three days after people, some 3,800 oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico still brave the waves, still pumping 1.5 million barrels of oil a day.
If people were to disappear, platforms could operate under their own power for a few days, because that's the amount of fuel that they carry. And then the emergency generators would kick in for another few days. But probably what would happen is that the pipelines would all fill up because there'd be no more consumption. And so there'd be a cascading effect of shutdowns.
34,000 miles of undersea pipe clog with undelivered oil. But watertight valves will keep the oil from leaking into the ocean, at least for now. Back on shore, billions of man's former companions are about to become extinct.
If all the people should disappear tomorrow, there are 3 species of insects that probably would care, and those are the lice. We have the head lice, the body lice, and the crab lice are all endemic to the human species.
Some 3 million years ago, these lice began evolving along with humans. Now, their DNA constrains them to specific areas of the body and a restricted diet, human blood.
If we disappear, they have nowhere else to go.
Without human blood, the lice die within 2 days. Creatures that coexisted with man from prehistory join their former hosts in oblivion. One week after people, in the vast freshwater bayous outside the city of New Orleans, 1.5 million alligators barely notice the absence of people. But a few have found some unexpected treats, escaped pets looking for a cool drink. Alligators have the strongest bite of any animal, chomping down at over 2,100 pounds per square inch. In the time of humans, alligators infested southern cities, including Houston and Miami, injuring hundreds of people and killing more than a dozen. Now, the thirsty dogs are in danger.
Alligators catch them at the water hole. So if you go for the drink, then all of a sudden, surprise.
At the Audubon Aquarium, the emergency generator has shut down after a week. The jellyfish are the first to die. These primitive animals are unable to keep themselves afloat. They depend on water currents. When the artificial currents stop, the bloodless, nerveless creatures sink to the bottom. Water pressure pushes through their gelatinous bodies, and they disintegrate. In the time of humans, the aquarium's 1 million gallons of water were cleaned and recirculated through 100 miles of plastic pipe. The waste was not dumped, rather it was eaten by trillions of bacteria called nitrosomonas placed in the pipes by the aquarium staff. The ammonia-gobbling nitrosomonas produced their own waste, which was consumed by other bacteria called nitrobacter. The system worked perfectly as long as it was operated by trained people.
Without people here, it would all slow down and then stop.
In the confines of an aquarium, the ammonia-filled waste crowds the tank as the oxygen is depleted. When the fish breathe, the ammonia poisons their systems. From shark to snapper, they gasp for air and hemorrhage internally. This is what happened the last time the aquarium was without people. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, flooding neighborhoods and knocking out power around the city, including at the aquarium. Standing on ground several feet above sea level, the aquarium wasn't flooded. But 3 days after Katrina, police evacuated the 9-person support team that had been left behind to care for the marine life. Then, the emergency generator went down. The recirculating pump stopped, and the catastrophe began. The fish used up the tank's oxygen and then suffocated or choked on their own waste. On the 4th day after the power went down, the aquarium staff returned.
You could smell the big Gulf of Mexico exhibit before you even got in the building. We went on top of the exhibit. With our flashlights, you could just see very large sharks floating, redfish floating. The whole surface was covered with dead animals.
The flashlights couldn't penetrate more than an inch into the warm water, blackened with decomposing fish. Then, something broke the surface.
We saw that. And I think we're all like, what the hell was that?
It was a tarpon, a saltwater game fish that can grow up to 6 feet or longer, a fish that can breach the surface to gulp air. The tarpon's dual ability saved it when all its water-breathing companions died. In fact, all the air breathers survived, including the 2 river otters, the penguins, and the rare white, blue-eyed crocodile. Now, with people gone forever, the aquarium generator loses power in a week. As the fish die, the waste-eating bacteria have an ammonia banquet. And the Katrina disaster is repeated, but there will be no last-minute rescues. A year from now, only one animal will survive. Which one? We shall see. One year after people, buildings along the world's almost 182,000 miles of coastline are being infiltrated by an invisible adversary: humidity. In Dubai, along the Persian Gulf, humidity is witheringly high, between 80 and 90%, which poses a unique threat to the Burj Al Arab Hotel. Rising up on an artificial island in the Persian Gulf, the 1,050-foot sail-shaped hotel was a symbol of the country when it was completed in 1999. But like all the high-tech towers of Dubai, the design that attracted tourists is a magnet for destruction now that people are gone.
The Dubai skyscrapers are very, very tall. A great many mechanical devices keep them running properly. A lot of air conditioning, a lot of mechanical temperature controls. That area is also very humid, and it's right by a body of salt water. So the climate and the very nature of those kinds of structures is working against them.
In the time of humans, the Burj's air conditioners battled both heat and humidity. Now, hot salt air seeps in, and mold, bacteria, and yeast eat away the linens and walls, while the 9,000 tons of steel begin to corrode.
I would say the saltwater air could probably enhance corrosion by a factor of 2 or 3.
If humans suddenly disappeared from Dubai, those buildings would start deteriorating literally within a year or 2.
In New Orleans, the aquarium has suffered little outside deterioration after a year. But inside, there is only one survivor: the white alligator. Alligators can survive for a year without food. They conserve energy in extreme situations by reducing their heart rate to 1 or 2 beats per minute. But after a year, there will be few heartbeats left. New Orleans' past and present point the way to the city's future. Elsewhere, waters rise in cities from Seattle to Moscow. And disaster hides in places as seemingly harmless as a rain cloud or a pile of leaves. "4 years after people, some cities have fallen victim to floods. While water's initial attack can be brutal, the real devastation often comes after a long-term siege. With no people to repair the damage, homes succumb to decay, while the foundations of buildings slowly erode. This is a future that has already happened in New Orleans, Louisiana. On August 28, 2005, the stormwaters of Hurricane Katrina overwhelmed the levees and tore through the city, destroying 160,000 homes. Four years later, the scars remain.
You can see where the water line was from Hurricane Katrina. It's a little less than 2 feet below the eaves, which means that it's a little more than 17 feet above the ground here.
4 years after Katrina, the mud and debris have been cleared. The 270 floodgates and the 520 miles of levees have been fortified. New homes are being built. But recovery has lagged in parts of the lower 9th Ward, providing a grim preview of a life after people. 19,000 people once lived here. A few were celebrities, like rock and roll legend Fats Domino. Others were part of the lifeblood of New Orleans, staffing the hotels and playing music in the cafes. Many lost almost everything they had to Katrina. 4 years later, fewer than 20% have returned.
Hurricane Katrina destroyed houses to the point that they couldn't be repaired, and just washed people out of here.
The ruins of these homes are a warning to other flood-prone communities. The roof of this home buckled and broke under the flood's weight as the water surged in from above and through walls and windows.
This is a typical wood-framed house that you would find in the lower 9th Ward or St. Bernard Parish. The water was about 16 feet high in this area, and I would have put a lot of forces on the wood. This is almost 4 years later, and after it was initially gutted, probably very little's been done. It's continued to deteriorate.
But one material has endured the destructive power of water. The ceramic tile bonded to the hidden concrete slab may be the last part of the house to go. The clay and water compound has been sealed with a chemical glaze that keeps out heat, moisture, and bacteria. Most ceramics combine elements like oxygen or nitrogen with aluminum, calcium, or silicon. They have a strong crystalline atomic structure which resists moisture. Around the world, ceramic tiles have kept out water and decay for centuries.
I predict this floor will be here for hundreds of years. I don't feel any hollow sound under there, so come hell or high water, I think this floor will be here.
Although intact, the floor will soon be buried by what's left of the roof.
Maybe a good gust of wind will hit it and knock it over the rest of the way because it doesn't have a lot of residual strength in it. Once the bricks fall over, the frame isn't going to have a lot of resistance to wind. But if it's just left as it is, I predict that if you come back in 10 years, it'll be a pile of rubble on the ground. It could happen next year if we get a major hurricane.
Between the 18th century and the first decade of the 21st century, New Orleans suffered a dozen direct hits from hurricanes and severe tropical storms. But drainage pumps always dried things out, and the people always rebuilt.
Hurricane Betsy was in 1965. The area that we're in now got about 8 feet of water. I lived a couple of miles to the east in St. Bernard Parish, and we got 3 feet of water in the house. And our neighborhood probably took about a year to recover. But Hurricane Betsy was nothing like Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina was 10 times worse.
Many homes in St. Bernard's Parish today not only bear the marks of Katrina's savagery and man's neglect, they show the spread of a microscopic predator that will infest all homes threatened by water. Inside the apartments, high moisture levels are promoting the growth of mold spores. Out of more than 100,000 kinds of mold, the most common species associated with water damage in homes is the black, slimy Stachybotrys. The mold decomposes the drywall and the wood beneath, undermining the structure of the walls and ceilings, leaving the apartments more vulnerable to the hurricanes that are guaranteed to strike again.
If you come back in 20 years, the buildings will probably be piles of rubble on the ground, and you'll have trees and vines growing over the top of them.
In 30 years, the waters will have once more drowned New Orleans. And in 50 years, the heavens above will turn into a demolition derby. "20 years after people, the 7,000-foot seawall protecting downtown Seattle from the salt waters of Puget Sound is about to give way."
Downtown area of Seattle at one time was a salt marsh. Seawalls were built to keep the tide from coming up and into the town.
First built in 1934, the wall's wood supports have long been undermined by flea-sized 14-legged crustaceans called gribbles. To feed their need for nitrogen, the sea-going gribbles chew through timbers to eat microorganisms in the wood. Gribbles wrecked 2 of Columbus's ships in 1502 and ate through all the exterior wood on the sunken Titanic. Now, the gribbles have doomed the Seattle seawall. Uncontrolled seawater rushes in, turning much of downtown Seattle back into a saltwater marsh. 30 years after people. Despite damaged storm drains and seawalls, Seattle is high and dry compared to New Orleans.
It'll be flooded. New Orleans in 30 years will have fish and snakes and tops of houses sticking out and vines growing all over, and it'll be kind of like a jungle grown around the remnants of structures.
But this is not the result of failed levees. They still stand. New Orleans' real Achilles heel was its more than 150 drainage pumps. Without humans to run the pumps, and with little natural evaporation, the lower parts of the city filled with rain. Although Seattle has a reputation for rainfall, New Orleans actually averages almost twice as much, about 5 feet a year. Ironically, the levees that were built to keep water out now hold the flood in, creating new kinds of aquariums for the city.
The marble floors of some of the hotels here would be unrecognizable because they would be under layers and layers of sediment. They would be inhabited by things like clams, crabs, tube worms, and would eventually give way to be nurseries for some of the larger fish. "50 years after people. From 200 to 22,000 miles above the Earth's oceans, there is carnage. In the time of humans, almost 3,000 active satellites monitored the stars, the weather, and life below. In February 2009, a defunct Russian satellite ran into a US satellite in a 600-piece crash. Without humans to control the crowded spaceways, accidents have multiplied. Fragments strike at 15,000 miles an hour. The collisions send shards that impact other satellites, sending some down in flames to be extinguished in the sea. In Seattle, the 605-foot-tall Space Needle, built as the symbol of the 1962 World's Fair, once lured visitors with its spectacular views. Now, the windows people looked from have all blown out, destroyed by corrosion from Seattle's rain.
Our glass is expected to last 20, 25 years. But if you didn't have the proper maintenance, as corrosion gets in there, that's going to pinch on the glass and eventually cause cracks. Those cracks will become failures, and that'll be the thing that kind of opens up.
In the time of humans, it took 24 people and $2 million a year to maintain the needle's structure and safety. While the tall structure was an occasional target for lightning, the Space Needle will not perish by fire. After 50 years, the exterior paint has flaked away and the steel faces corrosion, some of it from an unexpected source. Water stored in the trees that have reclaimed the city.
The trees will dump leaves and pine needles on the ground, and some of this will fall on the basin. If the leaves fell in this area, if you had a stack of leaves here, those leaves would capture moisture, and they would hold the moisture, and they would hold it for weeks and months at times. And not only that, they're somewhat acidic, and rain is somewhat acidic, so the whole process could really accelerate corrosion.
Although the Space Needle will stand for many decades to come, the corrosive power of water will one day bring it down. While the Needle stands, its former high-altitude restaurant is a roosting place for peregrine falcons, the fastest creatures on Earth, swooping down on their prey at more than 270 miles an hour.
Peregrines naturally nest on cliffs, so putting a nest on a little ledge outside a window really is similar to nesting on a little ledge on a cliff. So if there's pigeons living below a nest, that's a good home.
Other birds have changed more than their habitats. In cities around the world, songbirds have changed their tunes and their frequencies. In the time of humans, researchers were amazed that recordings of songbird mating calls from the 1970s sounded different from the same kind of birds in the same areas 30 years later. The reason? Quiet country had become noisy city, so the birds adapted.
If you think about that background din of humanity as being a low frequency noise, we see birds shifting and singing, raising the pitch, raising the frequency of their songs to sing, to get their message across above this background noise.
Now, the cities have been silent for several generations of birds. The mating calls have returned to their lower frequencies, although no humans are around to record them. In Dubai, the Burj Al Arab can no longer hold out against nature's attacks. The metal skin of the building has fallen away, and now the corroded, mold-ridden structure falls apart. In the Gulf of Mexico, a century of hurricanes has reduced the 3,800 oil platforms to one.
Every time there's a hurricane, statistically, we lose about 3 or 4% of the platform fleet.
Over a 20-year period, a 9,000-ton oil platform can sink several feet into the soft seabed of the Gulf of Mexico. So every year makes it more vulnerable to ocean waves, which can top 50 feet.
The last platform would probably be a big rust bucket with a missing deck and barnacles and marine growth.
A final wave pushes the rusty hulk over into the waiting embrace of the deep. The next 2 centuries will see the toppling of a city symbol, the fall of an icon of earthly and spiritual power, and the final failure of the New Orleans levees, thanks to a creature so dangerous it was once hunted by the police. "110 years after people, marine animals create new habitats from the ruins of man's achievements.
They will find sunken vessels, fallen bridges, bric-a-brac, buildings that may have fallen in, sunken or flooded. Anything that provides some sort of a structure, marine organisms will start to colonize them.
Even sunken oil platforms are now habitats, with only a limited risk of oil seeping out of the undersea pipelines.
It would take probably a 60-year period for the systems that are containing the oil to fail sufficiently that you'd start oozing oil. But at the same time, the oil is going to degrade and gel and be less fluid. The automatic systems are designed to protect even without people.
The platforms are first colonized by barnacles, followed by sponges, corals, and oysters.
Next, what you'll start to see are invertebrates and reef fish that start to make homes in the crevices and the hideaways.
Within 5 years of the platform sinking, the sharks arrive, and the food chain is complete.
So it actually is an entire ecosystem where there might not have been anything there before.
Below the waves or above, water will leave nothing untransformed. "125 years after people, Moscow's colorful St. Basil's Cathedral still stands in Red Square. the disappearance of man has actually helped preserve it. In the time of humans, the foundations of the 16th century structure were weakened by vibrations from tank parades and rock concerts. An early 21st century Russian government report warned, if nothing is done, in 100 years we could lose it.
Buildings seem a lot like people. I mean, most people don't die instantly. You know, one thing starts to fail, and another thing starts to fail. And that's probably what happens with most of our buildings. It's a cascading effect.
St. Basil's death knell comes from decades of water damage. Cracked drainage pipes spill out rain and snow, forming a swamp that turns to ice in the winter, pushing against the outside walls. A final crack sends the central bell tower crashing into one of the domes. The eastern wall gives way. More domes fall, pulling wood, brick, and sacred icons down into the swamp. In New Orleans, the levees are being worn away by a relative of the beaver, the nutria. A 2-foot-long, 20-pound rodent, the nutria can swim, and it loves to burrow into the levees in search of food and shelter, clawing away at the structures. In the time of humans, New Orleans actually sent police SWAT teams after the rodents. In the 1990s, more than 14,000 were shot. Now, the nutrias have torn apart the levees in 1,000 places. The barriers fall apart, and the waters of the Mississippi tumble in to join with Lake Pontchartrain. Ironically, the failure of the levees actually reduces the floodwaters, which top 20 feet in places.
If the levees failed, then the water here will be basically sea level. And so, since this ground is 2 or 3 feet or 4 feet below sea level, that would be the depth of the water, and it would fluctuate with the tides.
Although the flood tide is lower, the introduction of so much salt water hastens the corrosion at the base of the buildings. "200 years after people, corrosion has also been eating away at the needle's supports.
When the roof starts to leak, moisture starts to get inside the structure, and that moisture causes the steel to want to corrode.
The weakest link probably is going to be some of these joints, some of the support bracing that's in place. You know, those are the kind of things that have the most opportunity for corrosion to kind of get into some cracks, take hold, and then expand from there.
Weakened from 100 wounds over 200 years, the symbol of hope and progress from 1962 gives up the fight and shatters among the trees below. As the planet's life after people stretches from thousands of years to millions, what products of man's hands will best survive the waters of destruction? If alien archaeologists someday excavate the drowned Earth, what will they find? 300 years after people, in the flooded marshlands of New Orleans, the tallest building has lasted the longest, the 697-foot corporate headquarters at One Shell Square. Its windows are gone, but the structure remains.
The concrete is poured around the steel columns, and so the steel is fairly well protected. So it's going to last several hundred years, I believe.
But water has been corroding the building for 300 years, while more than 20 major hurricanes have whipped around its walls and girders. a final Category 4 proves too much as wind and waves combine to bring the tower down. 1,000 years after people, New Orleans buildings are gone, but something else is surviving in the mud. Mardi Gras beads, strings of bright baubles worn to celebrate Fat Tuesday, originating in the 1920s as necklaces of cheap glass. The beads are now a form of sunken treasure.
Mardi Gras beads are basically plastic coming from China, and the string would probably break, but I'm sure there'll be little beads under the mud and the muck in thousands of years.
In the time of humans, staying above the mud was a prime concern when people thought about their deaths. They wanted their embalmed bodies to be safe from floods in above-ground stone mausoleums. New Orleans' first above-ground cemetery was built in 1789, the year George Washington became president. It was a practical solution to the problem of burying the dead in soggy ground, as well as an imitation of the aristocratic fashion in France and Spain of building impressive family tombs. Eventually, more than 40 of these so-called cities of the dead rose up in New Orleans. Impressive and mysterious, the carved tombs and marble mausoleums not only attracted prospective occupants, but curious tourists as well. Although some of the above-ground cemeteries were flooded during Hurricane Katrina, there was little damage to the tombs or the corpses. The cities of the dead withstood the worst effects of water for more than 200 years. But in several thousand years, geologic forces will pile up sediment, and the city of New Orleans will lie beneath the Mississippi Delta.
New Orleans is subsiding. We cannot stop that.
And the dead will no longer be undisturbed.
There will be some mud seeping in to the coffin, and that will begin to encase and envelop the remains of the body.
"10 million years after people, the fossilized corpses of New Orleans are 1.5 miles underground, where pressure and heat combine to cause a further transformation.
We're at temperatures now of that of boiling water. The bones will now be quite dense. The soft tissues carbonized, and what is being extracted from the soft tissues will be beginning to form oil, mobile hydrocarbons that will be migrating up through the sediment that has accumulated on top of our cemetery.
Humans who explored the Gulf of Mexico for oil now become oil themselves, becoming the fossil fuels they once exploited to run their cities. Man once probed the deep to provide food and energy for his cities and machines. Now, many of those achievements have sunk beneath the waves forever. Water has ravaged cities with floods from the sea and rain from the heavens. Towers built in months or years have been pulled down over decades by slow but unstoppable corrosion. Temples to eternal faiths have proved remarkably short-lived. Even monuments in stone were just sandcastles to be washed away. Mankind used water to radically reshape the landscapes of the world. The structures and creatures that survived after man will inherit an Earth forever changed by the force and fury of the waters of death. Just one more obstacle to overcome in a life after people.